Books and what they contain have been part of society since humans could read and write. The religious, the secular, even the humorous. Since humans could write down their thoughts, libraries have collected them. Pragmatic New Englanders could figure and read the scripture, but in the early days, books were few and far between. In a land and time where everything needed to be directly related to surviving, books were a luxury. Not for long, though. The Fitchburg Philosophical Society began in 1832. Eventually, they owned 150 volumes shared between the members of the society and available at the office of Dr. Jonas Marshall. Other groups came and went. Some, like the Athenaeum and the Lyceum, offered more than just books to their adult male dues-paying members. Great thinkers and orators, like Daniel Webster, who drew nearly 3,000 spectators in front of the Unitarian Church, visited the burgeoning metropolis. Oliver Wendell Holmes, considered one of Boston's literary elite, and newspaperman Horace Greeley both drew appreciative audiences. The Panic of 1857 changed things for well-to-do Fitchburgers. Libraries and books had always been for those who could afford to pay for them. Banks failing and less demand for their products, books were one of the first things to go. Quietly, another library formed in town. It was dedicated solely to works on the law and required by legislation. It still exists today as the Fitchburg Law Library.
They were begun in 1842 by statute. There was a general decision taken that if we were going to pass laws, the population should know what they were and be able to access them. So they organized the law libraries as county law libraries that were run loosely by bar associations or groups of lawyers. So that meant that quality control was kind of varied.
A blocked door at the rear of the library hides an unremarkable bathroom. At one time, much to the chagrin of librarians, this facility became the daily de facto private territory of a county official who worked across the hall. The town fathers began to see the need for a public library. In 1859, funds were appropriated, books were purchased from the various defunct reading organizations in town, and the library opened in Town Hall with 3,674 books. Immediately, the collection began to outgrow its quarters. Rodney Wallace, who began life as a poor rural boy in New Hampshire, made his fortune in Fitchburg. First he sold books, and then became a paper maker, an industry that would dominate the community's financial well-being for nearly a century. He gave the town a lot of land on the corner of Main and Newton Streets and a sum of money to build a library. The imposing building opened as a free public library in 1885. It housed an art room and reading room. The books were stored away from the patrons, accessible only on request. A water power elevator served the building, but was problematic from the beginning. Even before the grand opening, 2 policemen and an employee, described as all above average size, spent several hours stuck between 2 floors before a workman in the building discovered their plight. Another library soon opened in Fitchburg to serve students. The normal school did not require its students to purchase books, but kept them available for the future teachers, beginning in 1895.
Thompson was the all-encompassing building. All the classes were held in Thompson. The dance studio was in Thompson Hall. All the normal school, state, college courses were held in that building. Edgerly and Percival were observation schools, so the student teachers would go over there. So the students who lived in Palmer and Miller would use the tunnels to get into Thompson, and they would take all the classes in Thompson, and the library was on the 2nd floor.
As the ranks of professionally trained teachers increased, the role of the Fitchburg Public Library changed, and with it the requirements of the building. A children's room opened in 1889. The stacks were open to the public, and the art room was turned into a reference room. The community's interest in the library was intense. It was so well used, a separate children's library was needed.
The Children's Library was dedicated on September 28th in 1950, and Archibald MacLeish came and did that dedication. He was a famous poet. I think he was poet laureate of the United States at one point as well. And that was really the first freestanding children's library in the country, and was in all the architectural magazines because it was just such a unique structure in itself. And that was added to the back end of the original Wallace Library. It was its own structure connected by an underground tunnel, and was actually built partially with funds. They were charged by Mrs. Wallace to raise funds. So they held penny drives in their schools, children did chores and for money from their parents, and just tried to bring in as much as possible. And they brought in well over $1 million pennies to help construct that library. So they really felt very much a part of that.
Benefactor Alice G. Wallace emphasized that the children earned the money for their library. Eleanor Roosevelt, visiting family friends just before the library's dedication, praised the state-of-the-art building. The library expanded services throughout the city in an era when many did not have cars.
In 1953, a bookmobile was established at the public library, and that was a small truck that held books and went from neighborhood to neighborhood or into parks and to schools and served the children of Fitchburg and the adults. The original bookmobile had a screen on the back. It would show movies. The children, we have photographs of them sitting outside watching films and doing that. That was replaced sometime in the early 60s, I believe, by a new bookmobile. That went around to the schools and parks, and then neighborhoods, and that was replaced again in the 80s, I believe, 80s or early 90s. And then we actually budget crunched and all. I think we sold it in 2005 or 6. 7? It's went up, the last year on the road was probably 2007. And so we no longer have a bookmobile, but people have fond memories of visiting the bookmobile when the library came to you.
Despite a new building and off-site service, it wasn't clear sailing for the city's library. The old library was still outgrowing its quarters, and in 1958, Mayor Hedley Bray decided to cut the budget 15%. A hue and cry erupted in the city, supported by the Sentinel, and the next year Bray was voted out of office, and the city elected George Burke, a library supporter. Once again, the Wallace family stepped up to the plate, and with land and money gifts, enabled the present-day library to be built. The books moved temporarily to the Academy Street School. The old library and the church next door were demolished, and our present-day library emerged. It was a doozy. The old library was remembered in the new building.
Originally from the building, also in the garden, is the original sign. It says, I think it's the Wallace Library and Art Museum sign is on one of the walls. And then in the adult library is a seal from the original library. It's made of Venetian and antique glass. It was above the entrance to the old library built by Rodney Wallace, and it's now in the east end of the clear stories in the Wallace Library. And it's the seal of the city of Fitchburg. It has the dates of the city, when it was founded and when it was incorporated, and then has the river running through it as for the Nashua, as well as symbols of the industry. There's a derrick atop the Rollstone Hill showing the quarry. There's a lathe, cotton bales, anvil, gears, and a train, I believe, and other things.
At the dedication, Poet Laureate Archibald MacLeish returned and praised the city for providing a place where everyone could learn. He spoke 17 years earlier at the opening of the Youth Library. In many ways, the library has stood the test of time.
When this library was constructed, it was made for growth. And when you look again at old photographs, you'll see lots of spaces with chairs and tables in them, which have since been filled with bookshelves, because we needed to expand, and the population was increasing, and we had a professional library staff doing wonderful collection development, and we needed to do that. When people walk in the building now, to them it looks the same, because they still see bookshelves, they still see a few tables for people to sit at and do their work. What's missing are things like the card catalog. That's now in computers. What's been added is CDs, DVDs, books on tape, books on CD, videos, DVDs. We just have so much more.
The Fitchburg Public Library was not the only library in the city to expand. The Fitchburg State College Library moved out of a basement to a new building. Today, that building is undergoing major renovations.
This was opened in 1975. It was a combined campus center, student service offices, and the library. And it worked like this until May of this year. The building has to be changed. On the library side, it was opened as open floors, basically a warehouse. But with all the changes that are going on, there's a need for wiring, there's a need for study rooms, there's a need for more counseling offices on the campus center side of the building, and that's what's going to be done.
Even the law library, tucked away in the district courthouse, expanded into another room. It is now the only tenant in the 1871 building listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Only memories and dust float through the empty courtrooms where so many people's fates were determined. Expensive materials and budget issues plague the libraries.
It used to be a big question, what, should we spend $200 on this one journal? Well, now the question is, should you spend $4,000 on this one database? And that's where the question comes up. But the benefits outweigh those issues.
The Fitchburg Public Library lost its accreditation and the state funds that go with it in municipal budget cuts in 2008.
Well, to be certified, you need to have, your budget needs to be 2.5% more than the average of the last 3 years. Well, now our last 3 years are 269,000, 310,000, 350,000, and now we're at 440, 425, whatever it is. So we've met that goal. We're not open 59 hours.
Right, you get the automatic 2.5% increase like with Proposition 2.5? Is that
It's not that it's automatic, no.
No?
It's just that's how they adjusted did the formula. The MBLC had done the formula for certification. I think they probably used that, but they did. That's why they did the average of 3 years, because 1 year a community might be able to give you a 10% raise, and another year they can't. If the town can't make that, it's okay as long as the rest of the community was cut proportionally. So if the library budget is cut 6% and police is cut 3% and schools cut 4%, that's okay. It's all within a good range. You can make an argument for it. You have to apply for a waiver, but you can do that and more than likely would get it. But when everyone else gets a 2, 3, 4, 5% cut and the library receives a 69% cut, you don't get a waiver.
No matter which library patrons use, there are rules.
There was an incident a few years ago where a paralegal took out a number of books that were worth several hundreds of dollars and then didn't return them for 9 months. And there is a statute on the books that says keeping out a library book is illegal. It's a misdemeanor. And so I walked across the street. We have a district court right across the street. I walked across the street and filed a criminal complaint saying, this fellow has X number of counts, because there's 1 count per book of, failure to return a library book. And the magistrate was a little taken aback at first, but then said, okay, when he saw the dollar amount, because as I mentioned, these books can be expensive. He said, okay. And so a complaint was issued, and the paralegal ignored it. So there ended up being an arraignment, which shocked everybody. And there was a news stringer in the back of the room, and the story got picked up by the Herald, Boston Herald, and then couple of the television stations, local television stations, picked it up. And so I was a minor celebrity for a few weeks, and it was a little embarrassing. But it did get the message out that these are taxpayer-supported resources, and it's my job to make sure they're available when a taxpayer comes in looking for them. And so we don't really have too many return problems anymore. People do return the books.
All 3 of these libraries have changed over time, but dedicated librarians are filling a need.
There's information in one hand, and then there's people who need information on the other hand. And the role of the librarian is to connect the people who need the information to the information that they need, and then to get out of the way. And that's a role that I think society will always need. There's always going to be a need for a librarian, whether that librarian is standing in a brick and mortar collection surrounded by books. That's a variable that could change.
Welcome to the 9th episode of Fitchburg History with Ann O'Connor. Tonight we're discussing libraries, and I have with me Tracy Betts Sarahfield, who is the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Fitchburg Public Library. She's held this position since the spring. She's been on the board since she's moved here 4 years ago. Thank you for being here tonight, Tracy.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You've certainly jumped into the library board at a time when there's been quite a bit going on. You must have faced quite a few challenges already.
Yes.
Yes. Could we begin with maybe how the library is dealing with the loss of funding?
Certainly. We have, as everyone knows, we've lost quite a bit of our funding. And sorry.
Okay, well, as a result, you've had hours cut.
Yes, hours were cut, people were laid off, and that was unfortunate. We are now looking, we've developed a long-term strategy to get the hours back up to where they need to be. As you heard Sharon mention, there were certain guidelines that the Massachusetts Board of Libraries expects of municipal libraries. And so we're actively working towards that. It is it's like a hydra that every time you cut off one head, two grow back. So this is not an easy thing to do.
Right, why is it so important for the average citizen to have a library?
Well, this is where information comes from. We heard all of the librarians mention this is where information comes from. In a free and democratic society, the library is everyone's equal at the library. And you can come in, you can get a library card, you just need to show that you have a bill from some utility or a lease, and you can get a library card. And if you can check out anything you want, really. And if you are late with a book, it's only 5 cents a day. I mean, these are things that are very necessary in our lives, to have the access to information. Certainly with budgets being cut all across the board, people need libraries even more than they have in the past.
Now, one thing that you said impressed you when you came to this area was the collection that our library had.
Yes.
How is it different from what you've seen?
It's huge. It's complete. Now, in the last few years, it's been difficult to maintain what they're bringing in new every year. But really, the amount of videos that you can rent, documentaries, foreign films, books on tape, and books. The amount of books that they have in this library. As you wander around in the library, it's amazing to see. There are maps, there are magazines, archived magazines. The collection is extensive.
And one part of the collection you didn't mention just now, but did earlier, was the artwork.
Yes, I love it that you can check out artwork. We didn't have that at the library in Columbus, where I came from. And I just think that's wonderful that you can check out a piece of art. We still have that available. People take advantage of it all the time. You just need a library card.
It's pretty cool. I remember taking them out.
I think it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that struck me about this whole library funding thing over the last few years, in the earlier part of the show, we learned that the budget was cut 15% in 1958, and there was a hue and an uproar, and the mayor was voted out of office, and a new mayor was voted in. There hasn't been that groundswell these last few years. What's happened?
It could be that that must have a number of factors associated with it. People are all feeling the crunch of money, and they need to work a lot more. So people aren't as connected to walking into the library and seeing that it's not open at any given time, because maybe they're working 2 jobs now. But that's reason for them to need access to the collection even more, so that you don't have to go out and buy that book. Yeah, the library, it's also one of the greenest places in town, because how many people read that one book? That's another thing I love about the library. So many people can read. You can have one person reading, you can have one book that's read 25 or 30 times versus just one book that you keep on your shelf, that you read once and there it goes.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you said, or even just now, that you're making plans on how to be able to get the recertification back. Before we talk about any of those plans, why is it important to have this certification?
Well, the certification on a basic level for anyone using the library, opens up access to the collections in other libraries. And that's what really is where we're feeling the biggest sting, is that you can't just very easily get on your computer and request a book from another library. It happens that the books sometimes do show up. Like I told you, librarians are in the information business. They are not in the business of keeping information from anyone. And one of the people said, give them the information and then step back. That's absolutely what goes on. It's something that we're working towards, but the MBLC guidelines are very restrictive.
What's MBLC?
This is the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, and it's a group of library trustees that puts out these rules. And we have been trying to work very closely with the MBLC to get our certification back. But their rules are very rigid, and they have their reasons for having those rules be as rigid as they are. Mm-hmm. We have to respect that, but it does make it very difficult for the average person on the street to come in and get a book.
Okay. Now, one of the ways that
I'm sorry, we are still a part, because our collection is so huge, we are still a part of anyone from a surrounding town or in the Commonwealth taking advantage of the interlibrary loan, which is what we're lacking right now.
Okay, but Fitchburg is still lending out its entire collection.
Yes, and we generate revenue from doing that, so it's a sort of not something we wanted to get rid of.
Okay.
Preference is given to people who are from Fitchburg, obviously. But if there's a book that somebody wants from another town, it certainly goes out. And like I said, currently we are generating revenue from doing that. If it comes to the point where we're no longer generating revenue from that, then the trustees need to look at that and see if it's something that we still want to be doing.
So do the libraries who are borrowing the books pay a fee to Fitchburg? Do you know how that works?
The money comes from the state.
Oh, okay.
So we get a certain portion of money every time a book goes out. It comes in the form of a check from the state.
Okay.
I believe.
Okay, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you that.
No, it comes from the state.
No,
No, it comes from the state.
Okay. Now, one thing that you mentioned that as a board you wanted to see happen was you wanted to increase communication between city officials, and what's happening with that?
I think since taking over as chair, I have done the best that I could to increase communication with the mayor's office and with city councilors. So what have I done? Basically, I've scheduled appointments with the mayor. That wasn't being done before on a regular basis for a number of reasons. But what I like to do is go in and talk to the mayor. I have taken the mayor with me to other libraries. We've gone on tours of other libraries to see how they're doing, what they're doing in their libraries, and to see if we can use that at Fitchburg. The mayor's been very responsive, and she has been a very strong supporter of the library. In spite of the budget cutting and all that occurred, she has been a very strong supporter of the library. The city councilors as well. It basically just meant I picked up the phone and called some city councilors to talk to them, and they have all been very willing to talk to me about the library.
Great. Now, you said that one councilor who had not been supportive of the library before has gone out and done fundraising.
Yes, and it's wonderful. The library, a thriving library, is a gift to the community, and I think all of the city councilors and all of the administration of the city understands that. Most of them are people who grew up in Fitchburg and took advantage of the library when they were growing up, and see that when it is thriving, it's a very powerful gift. We want to move back towards that.
Great. Now, another thing you mentioned was that the money that you have, that still remains, is not always spent in the most efficient ways. What ways could you see the library being more efficient?
Well, I would love to see us taking advantage of technology 110%, if that was, the best that we can. We have Wi-Fi in the building, and we do use computers now. Everything is digitized, as you heard Sharon mention. I would love to see the mechanization of some services. That would take, that's what's going on. It's an industry standard that we need to look forward to. I would love to see Fitchburg become a 21st century library. Like I told you, you don't need to have a librarian checking out the books. In many libraries throughout the country, that is done by a computer. So you could have a number of computers staffed by a volunteer, a trained volunteer, where you check out your own books. It's like at the grocery store where you have the self-checkout machines. People thought that could never happen.
Okay.
Well, it does happen. I would also love, so that's one way to use technology to help us become more efficient. That way the people who are working can do what they're trained to do. Checking out books is an important part of the process, but it's something that is mechanized as a standard in the industry. Also, what I'd like to see is roving librarians. We had the results of a survey that we did sort of has led us to believe that it's best to have librarians not behind the counter. With a population in Fitchburg that's as diverse as it is, not everybody feels comfortable walking up to the librarian. So it would be wonderful to see us moving towards librarians wandering around, providing excellent customer service with a personal device that they can hold in their hands that uses the Wi-Fi in the building and provides them access to all the information they need. My perfect example is, I heard something in the car on NPR, but I can't remember exactly what it was. So the librarian can just go right to the website, right there in her hand, figure out what it was you were talking about. On that same website, they can see, is that book something we own? Do we need to get it from another library? These are things that I think would help everybody in the community.
Okay. Now, one theme that I'm hearing from everything that we've spoken about tonight is that it really is, running a library is a very labor-intensive situation. Maybe we have about a minute left. Could you tell us what you need for volunteers at the library to keep things running and make them run even better for everybody?
We have many opportunities for volunteers. Currently, we are seeking members to sit on the Board of Trustees. We would love to have anybody apply to that position that would like to, and you need to be over 18 and a resident of Fitchburg. We have a number of positions open there. The ambassador program that we started is for people to go out into the community and talk about the library. That was also a result of the marketing survey that we took advantage of. We also have every day just working in the library, shelving books, helping out in the library, and that's another thing that we would love to see people do. We have thousands of hours of volunteer work as right now, but so we appreciate everything that they do. But if you would like to be a part of the library, you're always welcome to come and volunteer.
Well, great. Thank you. You've spoken very well about the library. And I'd also like to thank all the staff and volunteers at FATV who've made this show possible. Like I said, this was the 9th episode. Next month, we're going to be talking about social services, another thing that affects us all. And I hope you tune back in. I'll be playing the only song I know about books, so enjoy. That is, if I can find the ukulele. I wonder, who wrote the book of love? Tell me, oh, who wrote the book of love? I've got to know the answer. Was it someone from above? I wonder, who wrote the book of love? I love you, darling, baby, you know I do. But I've got to see this book of love and find out why it's true. I wonder, who wrote the book of love? Chapter 1 says love her with all your heart. Chapter 2, you tell her you're never gonna part. In Chapter 3, remember the meaning of romance. In Chapter 4, you break up, but you give her just one more chance.